Chapter 88. At the Gates of White Goat Cave. The dozen or so White Goat Cave teachers who had been left behind looked with joy at the White Goat Cave people that appeared on the nearby mountain path. The final news of the Sword Trial Festival came. White Goat Cave had taken 2 of the final 3 victors, and the new genius Ding Ning had an exceptional performance. Everyone in White Goat Cave felt honored and even had some hope. Ding Ning got off the carriage. He had to greet and accept the congratulations. Where is Su Qin? A teacher did not see Su Qin's figure, but knew that Su Qin's left hand was crippled. He couldn't help but ask Li Daoji in a low voice. Li Daoji answered. After the Sword Trial Festival ended, he left the Green Vine Sword Academy without saying goodbye. Since he did not return, it means he will not return. The teacher let out a long sigh. He's too sharp and aggressive. Even a gentle and honest person like Zhang Yi is being targeted. It's too much. It's a pity that he has such good talent. Are you going to rest in White Goat Cave today, or return to your home in Falling Parasol? Shui Wangshu, who was walking at the front, turned slightly and asked Ding Ning. I have not returned for many days. My aunt must be worried about me, so I will return to my home in Falling Parasol to rest. Ding Ning frowned slightly, as though he was thinking. He said softly, I also wanted to talk to you about some things. I grew up in the marketplace and am used to that kind of place. White Goat Cave is so quiet that I do not feel comfortable. In the future, I want to cultivate more outside. Cultivation pursues comfort and freedom. The most comfortable state is the most beneficial for cultivation. Shui Wangshu did not refuse, but when he turned his head, many complicated emotions appeared in his eyes. Come with me first. Ding Ning calmly followed behind Shui Wangshu. The green suet jade is not ordinary. How do you prepare to use it? Shui Wangshu asked from the front. Ding Ning replied, I'm preparing to refine it when I get back tonight, so I don't have to worry about it. Shui Wangshu was silent for a long moment, and then said, This is a good idea. While the green suet jade is most useful in Realm 3 to 4 breakthroughs, and after Realm 6, it can allow cultivators to better accept some life bond items, there are too many variables in the future. It is good to just look at the present. Ding Ning looked at him strangely. Cave Master, you seem to be a little depressed today. You're not as carefree as you usually are. Shui Wangshu laughed. Is that so? You can even tell that I have something on my mind? As they chatted, the 2 of them, one at the front and one at the back, climbed up the mountain path that White Goat Cave had carved out along the mountain walls. While their pace was not fast, they pulled away from everyone in White Goat Cave behind them. No one knew that he had come here in the end and was waiting here with his head bowed, looking at his numb left hand. The corners of his lips moved, and he smiled bitterly. His smile was filled with pain. His birth had been poor. So even though his talent was outstanding, he had been threatened and ostracized when he participated in the exams of some sections. In the end, he could only settle down in White Goat Cave. In White Goat Cave, he was like a crane among chickens. Even Di Qingmei of the Green Vine Sword Academy was interested in recruiting him. White Goat Cave was a cultivation place that even the Empress paid attention to. In the future, if he acted according to the Empress' wishes, he would have a bright future. He was already extremely afraid of living those days of poverty, being threatened, and being ostracized. He only wanted to become a nobleman who could threaten and ostracize others. However, the sudden appearance of a wine shop youth, a trial, and a single sword strike had destroyed everything he currently possessed. Compared to the pain in his heart, he could not feel the pain in his body. In the deep courtyard, in the noble and elegant study, Li Lingjun looked up at Lu Sish and said gently, That wine shop youth surprised me again. Lu Sish said apologetically, It was my mistake. It has nothing to do with you. No one would have thought that he would have such a performance, especially when I spoke with him personally. I could not connect him to such a monster. Li Lingjun glanced at Lu Sish. Is Su Qin still standing at the door? Lu Sish nodded. Still waiting, Li Lingjun said with slight disdain. What did he say to you? Why does he feel he has the right to wait for my reply? Lu Sish said calmly. When he asked for an audience, he said that while his left hand is crippled, his circulation of energies, his perception of the primal energies of the universe, and his comprehension of sword skills far surpass ordinary cultivators. Even if his right hand cannot perform exquisite sword skills, he has reached vital energy realm at his age. If he reaches realm 5 one day, when he uses a flying sword, losing his left hand will not be a hindrance. That is a good idea. If he uses a flying sword, he will not lose his hand. But when a flying sword attacks from afar, it does not have much defense against close combat. So, which of the Realm 5 cultivators in Changling does not have 2 swords? Don't tell me that when he reaches the 5th realm, he'll have to find another personal attendant to guard him? Li Lingjun shook his head and said slowly, to be able to organize his emotions in such a short time and think of some countermeasures, adding on his previous performance, his personality is too vicious. Compared to Mo Chun, who knew he could not do it, but still made a last attempt because of my sword, I admire Mo Chun more. I think the snow dandelion sword you gave him has value. Lu Sish thought the same. He said, then should we chase him away? Li Lingjun thought for a long time. I am in need of people. Let's see if he can be made, and if he can be of use to me. Many breaths later, he made a decision. He looked at Lu Sish and said, have him take care of the horses for me, and wash the stables. Su Qin suddenly looked up. The door that had been closed for a long time finally opened, but what appeared in front of him was only a servant girl in blue robes. He immediately sensed something, and his face paled slightly. Come with me. The servant girl in blue robes glanced casually at him and said as though she was commanding a coarser servant. Then she turned and did not even look at Su Qin, who was standing outside the door. Su Qin took a deep breath and followed. After passing through many courtyards, the servant girl in blue robes took out a handkerchief and covered her nose in disgust. She stopped outside a stable. She turned to look at Su Qin. Seeing the blood and yellow medicine on the bandage on Su Qin's left hand, her gaze grew disgust, as though his body was as smelly as the manure in the stables. She pressed the handkerchief tighter and said quickly, Master has ordered that you can stay here to help him clean the stables and take care of the horses. Su Qin's face grew paler. He saw the flowing feces in the stables behind this green-clothed servant girl. Thinking that he would one day be associated with these things and suffer such humiliation, he couldn't say anything for a moment. Do you want to stay in the Fu or not? If you don't want to stay in the mansion, then come out with me now. The servant girl in green said fiercely, and then directly left. Su Qin still did not speak. The servant girl's eyebrows rose slightly, just as she was about to rage. Unexpectedly, Su Qin took a deep breath and walked towards the stables. He started to carry water and wash the stables. Chapter 89. At night, the curtain of night seemed to be unable to hold back the precipitation of winter. White snowflakes started to appear in the sky. The carriage waiting at the gates of White Goat Cave had been wrapped in black cloth, but now it was slowly dyed white. Ding Ning walked out of the gates of White Goat Cave. He did not have an umbrella. When he walked to the front of the carriage, he bowed to Jing Mazong, who was still dressed in gray robes. Then he patted his clothes, scratched his hair, and got rid of the snow on his body. Then he lifted the thick black cloth and entered the carriage. You are really weak. looking at Wang Taishu, who was dressed in a fox fur robe and seemed to have buried himself in a pile of fox fur. Ding Ning could not help but say, "After this winter, I will not be so weak until next spring." Wang Taishu smiled slightly. This smile made him look even more like a cunning old fox. "Why did you want to see me today?" Outside the carriage, Jing Maozong had started to drive. The carriage shook slightly. Ding Ning pulled out a cushion to lean against and said, "I heard that something major has happened in Chongling in the last few days." "You speak of Bai Shanshui?" Wang Taishu glanced at him, nodded, and said, "You probably only learned today that Chongling has been turned upside down. Supposedly, the two prime ministers and the empress are unusually angry. Many of the Chongling officials have been removed from their posts and exiled, especially when Bai Shanshui was fighting and singing. His lyrics were too impudent, and he successfully escaped. The storm will probably grow." Ding Ning said Bai Shanshui acted, but there were no people around who could stop him from escaping Chongling. "Do you know the inside story?" Wang Taishu said, "The Chongling guards were chasing some stolen items from the imperial mausoleum and forced out Fanjua and Bai Shanshui. At the time, Fanjua was in the caravan being investigated. He must not have been able to hide his identity as a powerful cultivator. So he acted and lured out Bai Shanshui. But the Chongling guards surrounded that caravan at the start. Such a coincidence. I fear there are secrets we do not know." Ding Ning frowned slightly and said, "Someone in Chongling must have wanted to scare Bai Shanshui away. But I heard that Bai Shanshui killed his way out of the Zhejiang Commandery meeting hall and escaped through the Wei River. With such cultivation, he should be much stronger than Zhao Zhan." Wang Taishu smiled and said, "Bai Shanshui was originally someone as famous as fourth Mr. Zhao. You didn't want to see me today to discuss Bai Shanshui's cultivation, did you?" Ding Ning glanced at him and asked, "What have you been doing recently?" Wang Taishu's expression became serious. He said seriously, "Actually, I'd like to hear your opinion on what I should do recently." "You will definitely be someone who will do great things in the future." Wang Taishu laughed. "Since we are both people who will do great things, it is not strange no matter what we do." A carriage covered in snow passed through the alley and stopped outside the nameless wine shop in Falling Parasol. Ding Ning got off the carriage and waved goodbye to Jing Maozong and Wang Taishu, pushing open the half-closed door. Zhang Sun Qianxue was waiting for him with a small oil lamp as usual. The food on the table seemed to have just come out of the steamer and was still steaming. Ding Ning saw that Zhang Sun Qianxue had changed into a new jacket. While it was the most common style on the streets, some of the most ordinary flower decorations seemed especially vivid and bright on her clothes. So when he sat down, he could not help but say, "Other people look good with their clothes, but you make them look good." Zhang Sun Qianxue did not care about his words and said coldly, "Why are you sitting in Wang Taishu's carriage again?" Ding Ning started to eat as he said, "Because I have something I need his help with." Zhang Sun Qianxue did not ask further. This was a natural agreement she and Ding Ning had formed over many years. "You really won the sword trial festival." Seeing Ding Ning eating so happily, she also took a piece of sweet rice cake and slowly ate it, which was something she rarely did or had never done before. At the same time, she asked in an indifferent tone. Ding Ning made a sound of acknowledgement. He immediately took out a square wooden box from his sleeve and handed it to Zhang Sun Qianxue. Zhang Sun Qianxue did not need to look to know that the box contained the green suet jade that was very important to her. She did not immediately take the box. Instead, she looked at Ding Ning and said slowly, "Thank you." Ding Ning said casually, "There is no need to thank me between you and me." Zhang Sun Qianxue said coldly, "This time is different from the past. You should know that after the last obstacle and this green suet jade, my sword will be stabilized. In the future, I will not have much reliance on you. If it was me, I may not give this green suet jade to you. This has nothing to do with me. Ding Ning looked up and licked his lips. He looked at her and said, because in these years, I never thought of relying on you to do anything. Zhang Sun Qianxue frowned. In these years, other than cultivation, she rarely thought about other things. But she was not stupid, so she quickly realized that while she had great power compared to ordinary cultivators, Ding Ning had not relied on her to do anything in these years. He had not even asked her to protect him once. Ding Ning did not say anything. Tonight, you will sleep alone. Zhang Sun Qianxue inexplicably did not say anything else. She took the wooden box and walked towards the backyard. I owe you a favor. Ding Ning smiled bitterly. When she passed through the backyard and walked into the bedroom, snowflakes fell on Zhang Sun Qianxue's flawless face. Feeling the coldness of the snowflakes, Zhang Sun Qianxue felt more and more that the grievances of Chongling were too complicated. She did not think more. She pushed her chaotic thoughts out of her body and turned her mind into a blank sheet of paper again. Just like when she cultivated in the past, she lay down on the bed with her clothes on. The green suet jade in the square wooden box was emitting an extremely soft halo, and at the same time, it was emitting a faint fragrance that refreshed the mind. A strand of true essence seeped out from her fingertips and instantly crushed the green suet jade into powder. All of the powder entered her stomach along with her breath. When her consciousness sank into her energy sea and touched the blue sword in the Jade Palace, the sword once again became restless like an imprisoned dragon. It gave off an incomparably ferocious aura, as if it wanted to forcibly pierce through her Jade Palace and then charge out of her body through her energy sea. However, waves of light green yuan qi continuously surged out of her body and sank into her energy sea. This light green energy that emitted a gentle halo constantly merged into the Jade Palace and into the blue sword. The blue sword slowly calmed down and started to truly accept the presence of her Jade Palace. Her mind started to merge into one with the sword. In the darkness, a faint blue flame flashed between her eyebrows like a small blue sword. Chapter 90. Ding Ning silently sensed the changes in Zhang Sun Qianxue's sword through the curtain. When the faint blue flame lit up on Zhang Sun Qianxue's forehead, he knew that this sword would not harm her body in the future. She would be safer in Chongling in the future. But this also meant that he and Zhang Sun Qianxue were even further apart. He closed his eyes and started to cultivate. His cultivation tonight was also different from usual, as countless tiny snowflakes fell on the roof tiles and gave off soft sounds that only cultivators could hear. His body also gave off soft sounds. All the little silkworms hidden in his body seemed to appear at the same time and became active. For any cultivator, there was only one place that could store physical energy, the energy sea of a cultivator. But at this time, the countless little silkworms in his body spat out tiny bursts of physical energy like they were spitting out silk. This was truly thousands of streams forming an ocean. All of the space in his energy sea was slowly filled with physical energy, and there were countless tiny threads of physical energy flowing into his energy sea. His energy sea was swollen to the point of bursting. The tiny threads of physical energy that appeared inconceivable to ordinary cultivators in his body were stronger than the physical energy in his energy sea and were still pressing in. Seeing that his energy sea was about to explode, with a thought from Ding Ning, the celestial aperture in his energy sea opened. A wave of physical energy flooded into his body at a speed that could not be reached in normal times. The rapidly flowing physical energy formed a rapid cycle in his body. Under the pressure of the energy sea that was still swollen to its limit, the tiny threads of physical energy merged completely with the physical energy that had been stored in his energy sea and became more condensed. Countless tiny sounds came from every bone in his body. The tiny threads of physical energy broke through the innermost membrane and started to nourish the marrow river in the deepest part of his bones. His 9-death silkworm divine art and 3 corpses, non-self-consciousness sutra cultivation, became the same. The countless little silkworms in his body started to swallow back the physical energy and then quickly disappeared. His energy sea calmed, and his cultivation reached energy, refinement, first-class marrow transformation. In the cultivation methods of Chanling's sects, the higher the cultivation, the better the physical energy or vital energy would nourish the body, and the longer the cultivator's lifespan would be. Yet when his energy sea calmed down, some new nether fire seemed to ignite in his 5 viscera. The energies of his 5 viscera were more vigorous and dry than before. The more vigorous the chi of the 5 viscera was, the faster the conversion of chi and true chi would be, and the faster the speed of cultivation would be. This meant that other than some mysteries unknown to the cultivators of the world, the 9-death silkworm divine art, the higher the cultivation, the faster the cultivation. This was an inconceivable matter. For all other methods in the world, the higher the cultivation, the slower the cultivation and breakthrough. Compared to Ding Ning's true cultivation, Ding Ning's progress was not fast. Many geniuses of the same age as him might have reached vital energy realm long ago and walked ahead of him. For example, An Baosher of Lingshu Sword Gate and Jing Liuli of Min Mountain Sword Sect. These 2 legendary monsters had only used a month to go from Realm 1 to Realm 2 energy refinement. But according to their records, they had used 8 months to go from Realm 2 energy refinement to Realm 3 vital energy realm. This speed was terrifying for ordinary cultivators because ordinary cultivators would need at least several years to achieve this. Some people faced the same problem as Nangong Kaishu and could not even sense the primal energies of the universe and ended up in Realm 2. However, compared to 1 month, 8 months was already 8 times the time. From vital energy realm to energy fusion realm, for ordinary cultivators, it was at least 8 times the time, at least 6 to 8 years. Then 8 times, it was at least 6 to 48 years. So most cultivators who did not have special encounters and did not have outstanding talent would at most reach Realm 5 Spirit Thought Realm in their lifetime. This was the true reason cultivators above Realm 6 were rare, and cultivators above Realm 7 were grandmasters. The uniqueness of the 9-death silkworm divine art meant that Ding Ning could shorten the time in each realm. But the stronger the energies, the more the body could not replenish the energy, and he would overdraw on his lifespan. This was like burning one's lifespan in exchange for cultivation speed. So Zhang Sun Qianxue, who had sensed this characteristic a long time ago, concluded that this 9-death silkworm was a method that sought death. If they were like Nangong Kaishu and got stuck at a certain realm, the person who cultivated this method would not even be able to increase their cultivation speed and would die with a grievance. In the tallest temple of White Goat Cave, Shui Wangshu and Li Daoji faced the snowy valley. You naturally did not want me to come to admire the snow with you. Li Daoji was silent for a long time and said, "Say what you want to say. Being wishy-washy is Zhang Yi's personality, not yours." Today, I wrote a letter to the Helan Commandery Governor of the Northern Lands. You will depart tomorrow. When you arrive, he should have seen my letter. Shui Wangshu did not turn to look at Li Daoji, and only looked at the snowflakes spinning in the wind as he spoke softly. Li Daoji did not turn to look at Shui Wangshu and was silent. Shui Wangshu said gently, "His Majesty will be furious about Bai Shanshui's matter. While you are not from Wei, you are from Han, and in White Goat Cave, you may be involved." Li Daoji's eyebrows rose like 2 small swords. he said coldly. As long as White Goat Cave has you, even if by Shanshui's matter causes a storm, I will not have to leave Changling and avoid the north. Since we have known each other for so long, it is time to part. Say what you have to say. There is no meaning in using this excuse to avoid me. Shui Wangshu smiled, embarrassedly like a child whose lie was exposed. There does not seem to be any meaning. His smile immediately disappeared. He said seriously, maybe White Goat Cave is too small. I have been here for so many years, but have never seen a genius as talented as Ding Ning. I have never seen the two legendary monsters of Lingshu Sword Gate and Min Mountain Sword Sect. I do not know how they compare to Ding Ning, but Ding Ning defeated Su Qin. I am certain that if he is given enough time, his future accomplishments will surpass mine. I am too old, no matter how much I cherish my life. If I use up all my remaining time, I will not even be able to cross a small realm, much less a major realm. It is better to take him forward. Li Daoji sank into silence again. If he was Shui Wangshu, he would make the same choice. But after leaving this temple, he knew he may never see this white-haired old man again. When people meet, there will be a time to part. My senior sect brother and I are the same. I have endured my entire life. I showed my cultivation on the road outside Changling and acted presumptuously once. I always felt it was not enough. Fortunately, senior sect brother brought me Ding Ning. Doing some unbridled things will have meaning. Shui Wangshu smiled and said a few words. He reached out and grasped the small white jade sword that had always been hanging at his waist. Li Daoji suddenly realized something. He suddenly turned around and wanted to say something. Look at this sword. But Shui Wangshu shook his head at him, indicating for him to not speak and look forward. Then Shui Wangshu swung his sword. A ball of white sword chi surged from the body of the sword to the tip of the sword. The powerful primal energies of the universe suddenly tore open a completely pure space in the snowy sky ahead. Then a snowy white curved goat horn appeared in this space. It was a simple white goat hanging horns, the most ordinary sword move in the White Goat Sword Manual. You have to remember, Shui Wangshu looked with satisfaction at the snowy white sword energy. He said softly and solemnly to Li Daoji, White Goat hanging horn, the most important thing is not the horn, but forbearance and balance. I do not know if you remember, but the first day you entered White Goat Cave, I took you to see the white goats fighting in the mountains. Li Daoji closed his eyes. He tried to recall, and finally a scene he had forgotten for a long time appeared in his mind. In the scene, two curved-horned goats were fighting. One of them faced an opponent who was clearly fiercer. It only stood firm and used the thickest part of its horn to block the other's attacks. It did not even counterattack. The other's vicious attacks even broke off one of its horns. Yet it only managed to hold on. The broken horn stabbed into the opponent's head. Li Daoji took a deep breath. He opened his eyes and finally understood the true meaning of white goat hanging horn. Shui Wangshu looked at him and knew he had understood. He smiled in satisfaction and handed the small white jade sword in his hand to Li Daoji. Li Daoji took the sword, knelt in front of Shui Wangshu, bowed 3 times, and then stood to leave. He did not say anything else. The slightly red hilt of the large sword in front of his chest moved further away in the wind and snow until it disappeared from Shui Wangshu's sight. Chapter 91. Snow had fallen in Changling, and snow had just started to appear in Guangzhou. Morning, Guangzhou's Qi Mountain. In the vast fields, a youth was practicing the sword. His sword was purple like Su Qin's sword, but the seal scripts on the surface were gold. Rumble! As he slashed with his sword, a true golden lightning suddenly appeared in the cold air. This golden lightning landed on the ground in front of him. Yellow dirt flew, and clumps of wild grass started to burn. The young man turned around, his handsome face filled with an indescribable determination and sternness. "Uncle Jean." He put away his sword and said in a cold voice to a slightly fat middle-aged man sitting on an ox cart, "I still have to go to Chongling." The middle-aged man, he called Uncle Jean, sighed softly. "For Sierra. I do not blame Sierra. While she knows I fell in love with her, at first sight, we are not engaged." This youth looked in the direction of Chongling. "Originally, I only felt that the Thunder Firmament sword manual at home was stronger than many of the sword manuals in Chongling, and that I did not need to go to Chongling to learn. But now, I think I was wrong. Chongling does not just have secret cultivation manuals, but also many wonderful things. I am going to challenge that Ding Ning. I believe that if I can defeat Ding Ning, Sierra will change her mind." The middle-aged man smiled slightly. "If that is the case, then we will depart today. Otherwise, it will be hard to travel when it snows in Guangzhou." The large and small fields of Chongling's warden's office had accumulated a knuckle of snow. Yugu walked alone into a field filled with tiger wolf army flags. In the center of the field, there was a tall old man dressed in metal clothing. Yugu's golden energy was very strong, but he could not compare to this old man. That old man just stood there coldly, but had the presence of swallowing mountains and rivers and holding tens of thousands of soldiers. "General Seacombe." Yugu walked behind him and bowed to listen. The negotiations with that gangster of Chongling must end as soon as possible. The old man in metal armor did not look back. He said in a metallic voice, "The bottom line is the clearing of Chongling's storehouses, transportation, and the purchase of armor." Yugu's pupils shrunk in disbelief. His voice was slightly cold as he said, "General, he's just a commoner. How can he be considered a hero? Isn't it too much to agree to such conditions? The times create ambitious and ruthless people. Coincidentally, he is an ambitious and ruthless person." The old man said in a deep voice, "The Divinity Bureau has already used this opportunity to investigate the warden's office. The Empress has already revealed her intentions of transferring Feng Xiang back to command the Chongling Guards. If we don't end this as soon as possible, there will be more scandals. You should know the consequences." Shui Wangshu said, "We are going to Zhushan district of Ba Commandery." Ding Ning stilled. "Why are we going so far?" Shui Wangshu said, "There is a very lively temple fair there. We will make it in time if we go now. It will be very interesting." The thin slices of meat had been stir-fried with the red oil and spiciness. Then the pickled cabbage was added. After stir-frying, it was spread over the snow-like noodles. Ding Ning did not immediately pick up the bowl of noodles. Instead, he frowned. Just like how Li Daoji had scolded Shui Wangshu last night, he said softly, "Can you not use such a clumsy excuse? No matter how good your mood, you cannot travel so far to see a temple fair on a snowy day. Eat noodles, eat noodles." Shui Wangshu pointed at Ding Ning's noodle bowl and reminded him. Then he said, I'm going to get something." Ding Ning picked up the noodle bowl and sat down across from him. "What is it?" Shui Wangshu glanced at him and said, "Something to cure your illness." Ding Ning started to eat the noodles. When he finished the steaming bowl of noodles and only the soup was left, he looked up and said, "Feng Xiumu told me that nothing can cure my illness unless I can enter Min Mountain Sword Sect to cultivate and comprehend the heaven-replenishing divine art. This is the true reason you had Wang Taishu arrange for you to enter White Goat Cave, because White Goat Cave and the Green Vine Sword Academy have merged. We have the qualifications to attend the Min Mountain Sword Trials." Shui Wangshu looked calmly at Ding Ning's eyes and said, "Feng Xiumu is correct, but nothing is absolute. You are still too weak to attend next year's Min Mountain Sword Trials. Based on past years, most of the disciples that the sects send to attend the Min Mountain Sword Trials are at least vital energy realm. Sometimes there are even those monsters who have reached energy fusion realm. You are smarter than Zhang Yi and the others. You should know that those attending the Min Mountain Sword Trials are not just students from ordinary cultivation places, but also members of noble families. Shui Wangshu paused, and then said, "They are more terrifying than the students of ordinary cultivation places. Many of them do not have the ability to pass Min Mountain Sword Sect's tests immediately, but need time to be nurtured by their families. In the first few years of cultivation, their families can give them more resources, so they can cultivate faster. For those noble families, Min Mountain Sword Sect is not the only way to climb up, but a powerful aid in their cultivation." I already understood what you said when I entered White Goat Cave. Ding Ning glanced at Shui Wangshu and said with a frown, "But I also know that Ba Commandery's Jushan district is not an ordinary place." Shui Wangshu glanced at him and said, "Isn't it just that there are more Zheng people?" Ding Ning did not back down and looked back at him. He said, "Of course you know that it is not just the Zheng who have more people." Shui Wangshu was slightly angry and said, "I am the cave master of White Goat Cave, your teacher. I am telling you to come with me. Why are you not coming?" "You misunderstand my meaning." Ding Ning looked at his trembling white beard and said, "In reality, I also want to go to that place, but I am worried about your safety." Shui Wangshu's brows immediately relaxed, and he looked disdainfully at Ding Ning. "I am about to die of old age. Can't you let me have some glory before I die?" Ding Ning took a deep breath. He looked up at the white snow on the roof. After a moment of silence, he said softly, "A moment of pleasure is not glory, but if the students of White Goat Cave can win in the Min Mountain Sword Trials, they must have slapped many people's faces. For you, is that not glory?" "Of course it is true glory." Shui Wangshu laughed happily. "If there is such a day, even if I die of old age, I think I will die smiling." Ding Ning turned to look at him and shook his head. "What I mean is, even if you are going to die of old age, do not die so quickly. I also want to live longer." Shui Wangshu stilled and then laughed like a child. He reached out and patted Ding Ning and said, "Deal." Chapter 92. After the snow, Chongling became bone-chillingly cold. Even though snow was no longer falling from the sky, the snow between the roof tiles and in the dark places did not melt easily. In the end, they grew harder and turned into ice shells mixed with specks of dust. There were not many people walking through the Divinity Bureau. Many of the paths were covered in snow that could not be melted. Footprints of varying depths were imprinted on the light gray ice shells. The people who had left these footprints were nowhere to be found and added to the dark atmosphere of the Divinity Bureau. Occasionally, there would be a few screams that seemed to have their mouths gagged. They couldn't even scream in a carefree manner. They would faintly come out from the cracks in the doors of some of the houses. They would reverberate through the streets and then quickly disappear. Chief Inspector Chun, dressed in deep red robes, looked dispirited from beginning to end. He slowly walked on the path covered in snow, giving people the feeling of a wilted pomegranate. It was hard to associate him with the powerful nobility of the Qin dynasty. The old, deaf, and mute servant who had been driving the carriage for him was waiting at the gates of the Divinity Bureau. He did not give any orders, and the old servant did not make any gestures. After he boarded the carriage started to drive aimlessly through the streets of Chongling. Sitting in the crude carriage, Chief Inspector Chen had his head bowed slightly as though he was asleep, but at a certain moment, he slowly looked up and lifted the curtain. This carriage without any markings was moving into the shadows of a tall wall. When he lifted the curtain, Many waves of primal energies of the universe silently seeped out of his body. There wasn't even the slightest sound of wind. Layers of crystal-like brilliance quickly gathered around his body, as if forming countless mirrors, refracting the surrounding light rays. He wore a deep red robe, but even if people passed by, they would only see the curtain being blown open by the wind, and not see him walking out of the carriage. At this moment, he seemed to be transparent. Then he floated up, passed over the tall wall, and landed in the courtyard. The courtyard was a withered garden under the winter snow. Chief Inspector Chen passed through the garden and walked into the corridor. At this time, the crystal-like brilliance that had gathered around his body slowly disappeared, and his figure slowly emerged from the air like a ghost. He walked along the corridor and finally entered the inner courtyard. He stopped in front of a study. He did not deliberately disguise his footsteps. In this study, there was a middle-aged man with a long beard who looked like a scholar. He wore a gray cotton robe and was originally grinding ink, about to write a letter. However, because of the cold weather, the ink had not completely melted. This middle-aged bearded man heard the unfamiliar footsteps, but he did not stop grinding ink. Even though he knew this was an inexplicable guest, in his eyes, only a rare few people in Chongling could pose a threat to him. But how could those few important people who could pose a threat appear in front of him in such a manner? So when Chief Inspector Chen's footsteps stopped, he sneered and said, "It is cold outside. Since you have come, do not wait outside." Hearing the words from the study, Chief Inspector Chen's expression did not change. He did not even make any extra movements. The door to the study in front of him was pushed open by his presence. The middle-aged bearded man narrowed his eyes slightly and was about to say something, but when he saw Chief Inspector Chen's deep red robe and sensed the strange presence mixed with decadence and darkness, his proud expression suddenly froze. You are the Divinity Bureau." Cold energy surged out of his body and caused his tongue to stiffen. "I am." Bureau Chief Chen spat out these 3 words. The middle-aged bearded man immediately paled. "I know you are a very special middleman." Chief Inspector Chen looked coldly at him and said slowly and clearly, "There are some cultivators in the military and the outer commanderies who want to live good lives. They may have places where they need to spend money on their cultivation. But since there is no war, they cannot accumulate merit, receive rewards, or transfer orders. However, they had very good fighting strength. Some of them would kill for others. Some of the nobility in Chongling need people to kill for them. It is best if it is not connected to them." Thinking of the legends about this mysterious chief of the Divinity Bureau, the middle-aged bearded man broke out in a cold sweat and flowed down his face. But he still said strongly, "No matter what you say, it has nothing to do with me, because you do not have evidence." "You are right. I have no evidence." Chief Inspector Chen looked down coldly. The middle-aged man suddenly realized something. His eyes were instantly filled with disbelief. A ball of light burst out from his hand, like the rising sun. It emitted an abnormally terrifying aura that was about to blow up the entire study room. However, it was also at this moment that his mind suddenly became dizzy, and his vision became blurry. Every movement of his body became abnormally slow due to the dizziness of his thoughts. A deep red sword light flew out of Chief Inspector Chen's deep red sleeve and gently stabbed at his heart. The middle-aged bearded man's mind immediately cleared. However, a chill spread from his heart meridian. Looking at the crimson sword light that was retracted into his sleeve, the power in his body quickly faded like the tide. The sun-like brilliance in his hand was just a hair away, unable to penetrate his palm. Why? The middle-aged bearded man could not understand what method this legendary chief of the Divinity Bureau had used to make his mind lose focus in an instant. He also could not understand why the other dared to kill him without any evidence. "There is no why," Chief Inspector Chen said coldly, "but you do not understand me because I never do things according to the rules." The middle-aged bearded man covered his heart and slowly sat down. He was in great pain and said in puzzlement, "You are the chief of the Divinity Bureau, and you monitor the officials according to the laws of the Qin dynasty. Is it not a heavier crime for someone like you to not follow the rules? Even if you do not follow the rules, why do you want to kill me? Why do you want to learn something from me? People in our position can survive in Chongling only because of our loyalty to the Qin dynasty and His Majesty, and not because of our crimes." Chief Inspector Chen looked at him who refused to die and said coldly, "What I learned from you is not absolute evidence for those important people. What I need is to make the situation more chaotic. If people are chaotic, they will make mistakes for me to catch." The middle-aged bearded man was in even more pain. He groaned and made a strange sound from his throat. "Then why me? Why me? Because of your identity." Chief Inspector Chen looked expressionlessly at him and said, "Because you are not a member of the military. Even if I kill you, the military will not pay attention. Unless it is a military official related to you, he will use the power of the military to investigate this matter. He might want to know which power did this. As long as he investigates, I might be able to find out who he is." The middle-aged bearded man exhaled his last breath. He fell forward on the desk and died in pain. Powerful primal energies of the universe once again came out of Chief Inspector Chen's body. His body once again became transparent and disappeared in the air. He passed over the tall wall and walked through the streets as though he was transparent. People passed by along the way and did not notice his existence at all. He walked through several streets and alleys, lifted the curtain of the carriage that was still moving slowly, and sat in the carriage as if nothing had happened. Each day, he seemed to be sitting in this carriage driven by the deaf and mute old servant and patrolling through the streets of Chongling. He would occasionally give an order, but did nothing else. Yet, just now, in the deep-walled courtyard he had left, more blood flowed out of the chest of the middle-aged bearded man who had fallen dead on the desk. In the end, it covered the entire table and flowed down the corners to the ground. At the same time, Ding Ning was also in the moving carriage. He could not help but imagine such a scene. He felt happy and could not help but smile. He said, "I do not feel that you are obsessed because White Goat Cave is just a famous official to many people, but for you, it is a lifetime. But I heard that the Min Mountain Sword trials are different from the small-scale sword trials of our Green Vine Sword Academy. The top 3 are divided into first and second. So just entering the top 3 is not the happiest thing. If you want to fight, you have to fight for first place." Shui Wangshu stilled slightly. He saw absolute confidence from Ding Ning's smile and calm gaze. His hand almost broke off several strands of his white beard. "You want to fight for first place? Even though I have said so much to you, you still have such confidence?" Shui Wangshu shook his head and then breathed out and laughed. "If you can really take first place, I will go wild as a youth and run naked around the famous Sword River in front of Min Mountain Sword Sect. I will take first place," Ding Ning said confidently, and then looked strangely at Shui Wangshu. "Did you like to run naked when you were young? Do you have such a strange hobby?" Shui Wangshu laughed out loud and slapped the cushion with both hands, as if he had really returned to his youth. Young and frivolous, singing and drinking, who knows how many frivolous things. But after so many years, so many things were wrong. So many people left, but it is hard to turn back, and there is no chance to start over. Hearing Shui Wangshu's voice, Ding Ning closed his eyes and said softly inside, old man, while you are past your prime. I will follow you and give you true glory. Chapter 94. As time passed, the winter grew thicker. When they entered the Ba Commandery, the scenery along the way was completely different from Chongling. They could see that most of the low hills had been turned into terraced fields. There were small towns everywhere, but it was rare to see a large city. The steep peaks of the Ba Mountains stood shoulder to shoulder, like giants. Even now, there were few people in those places. Thousands of years ago, there were very few cultivators in the world. Cultivators who could comprehend the path or obtain some cultivation paths were people like earth immortals and sword immortals in the eyes of ordinary people. These people used the spirit veins to cultivate in the mountains. They were thought to eat the wind and dew, swallow the clouds, and left behind countless legends. When the countries of the world slowly grew strong and formed dynasties, the Qin dynasty and the Bazankendo ground rose, the Ba Mountains were set up as commanderies. While the population increased greatly, the spirit veins in the Ba Mountains had been cut off for hundreds of years. The ancient cultivation places inside seemed to have been eliminated and disappeared for many years. Even now, the Bazankendo ground had fallen in the storm of the Yuanwu Emperor's ascension. Compared to Chongling, which was densely populated with cultivators, there were very few cultivators in the Ba Commandery. Ordinary mountain people's understanding of cultivators was about the same as before. They felt that cultivators were immortals who ate the wind and dew and swallowed the clouds. So along the way, Shui Wangshu only needed to show some of his skills to easily switch to the best horses. Naturally, they did not travel slowly. This day, when Ding Ning lifted the curtain of the carriage that had been frozen hard by the ice, he saw a large village made of thousands of wooden buildings built along the slope. He knew that this was the Lianqing village. Before the Ba Mountains had been officially set up as commanderies, and before there were any garrisons, this was one of the largest gathering places of the Ba Mountain people. After passing through here and a valley, there was a basin. That was where Zhushan district was. Just as Ding Ning followed Shui Wangshu and neared Zhushan district, Wang Taishu and Yugu were having a meeting in the warden's office station on the outskirts of Chongling. Most of the time, Yugu's gaze was still on the wintersweet tree in the courtyard. His expression was still dignified and cold, but inside, he was truly calm. This was because he knew extremely well that based on the progress of the past few days, this negotiation that the warden's office needed to conclude as soon as possible would be concluded today. The cold air is already thick. If someone suddenly takes over the matter of the armor, it might be delayed. Wang Taishu's gaze also stopped on the wax plum tree. He said unhurriedly, so what General said before is reasonable. Two-level tower does not need the business of making armor, but we must have the business of opening warehouses. Other than this, I heard that many of Chongling's prisons have not been maintained for a long time, and the prisoners need to wear clothes in the cold. I fear that they will need some help. I think General can make the decision for two-level tower to do these matters. Yugu suddenly turned around. A sharp glint shot out from his eyes as he looked straight at Wang Taishu and said in a deep voice, "Are you serious?" This was completely out of his expectations. The repairs of the prisons, prison food, clothing, and some other matters. While there were great benefits in these, how could they compare to the astounding profits of making armor for the army? Wang Taishu smiled and said, "Even though I'm just a commoner and can't compare to a general whose orders are as high as a mountain, I can still keep my word." Yugu glanced at him and immediately misunderstood. He said with slight disdain, "To be able to enter the prisons, even if the people of two-level tower enter in the future, I think they will receive good care. Even the ghosts used as scapegoats will feel much more comfortable in there. The other gangsters of Chongling will have to think carefully before they oppose you. Their people will not have good days in there. Wang Taishu, you are retreating in order to advance, offend the warden's office less, and in the future, you will be able to take more territory in the fight against those gangsters. Your plan is not bad. Wang Taishu smiled slightly again and bowed humbly to Yugu. He said, "Thank you, General Yu, for your help." Yugu's expression turned slightly cold. Of course, he had not agreed, but Wang Taishu knew he would agree. He would agree. Getting the Clan Law Bureau to give some benefits was a minor matter for the warden's office. Wang Taishu's request did not touch the bottom line of the warden's office, and could even be said to have given the warden's office a lot of face. Yet, whether on the battlefield or in court, he was wary and disliked people who were too smart and could see the thoughts of their opponents. So in this moment, his eyes were filled with true murderousness. While I can satisfy some of your requests this time, you are a smart person. You should understand how the situation will change after this period of time. Yugu took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. He said in a slightly cold voice, "After this winter, it is best if you restrain yourself." Wang Taishu still bowed and said respectfully in a soft voice, "I will remember General's teachings." Yugu was silent. This negotiation that had been going on for a long time finally came to an end. While Wang Taishu's posture and words were so humble, he knew that after walking out of this relay station with the promise and cooperation of the military, Wang Taishu's two-level tower would quickly force the dozens of gangster gangs that relied on business to have nowhere to go, or be forced to merge into two-level tower. Two-level tower, which was already very powerful, would become an enormous entity that the other gangsters could not compare to, except for the underground ruler of Fish Market, because it was only half a day's journey from Lianqing Stockade to Jushan District. After asking for Ding Ning's opinion, Shui Wangshu and Ding Ning did not rest at Lianqing Stockade. They only ate some food and continued on their journey. "We will soon reach Jushan District. Do you have a plan?" Ding Ning asked Shui Wangshu as he rubbed his knees that were slightly uncomfortable from sitting for a long time. He had always been a very scheming person. For example, killing Song Shinshu, when to appear in front of Xie Changsheng and the others, and when to enter the cultivation places to attend the Min Mountain Sword trials. He had many meticulous plans and alternative plans. Originally, he would have done these things step by step. After entering Min Mountain Sword School, he would obtain the heaven-replenishing divine art that could work with the 9-death silkworm, prevent premature aging, and increase his cultivation speed. After obtaining the heaven-replenishing divine art, he could find the people on the wall one by one according to his cultivation and deal with them. But Song Shinshu had told him some secrets that disrupted his plans. Some things had to be done at the same time. The Feng family of Jushan District had not been part of his initial plans. Feng Qianzhua is like a lord of the land in Jushan District. Because he is a powerful cultivator, many people in the area think of him as a god that can protect an area. Shui Wangshu looked at the busy Ding Ning and explained, "He probably enjoys this kind of love. So every year, during temple fairs like this, he will appear, offer incense, donate some goods, and say a few words. At that time, if I challenge him in public, he should not be able to find a reason to refuse." Ding Ning said, "In any other place of the dynasty, everyone respects the brave and strong. They will admire both sides who publicly challenge each other. But in Jushan District, you are too hateful to challenge him in such a setting." Shui Wangshu said with slight disdain, "If you can win, it is not hate, but fear." Ding Ning said calmly, "Even if you are certain he has not entered Realm 7, the Bazin Kendo ground has some unique methods." "Of course, I will be careful." Shui Wangshu took a drink from the water bag and looked seriously at Ding Ning. "But you say you want to suppress all the young geniuses in the Min Mountain Sword trials. What is your plan? I have not seen you practice the sword on the way here." Have you comprehended the two sword manuals you chose? Ding Ning hesitated for a moment and then nodded. Shui Wangshu almost choked on a mouthful of water and coughed violently. Ding Ning glanced at him and casually used his finger to make a few gestures in the air. While it was just a simple count, there seemed to be many unique sounds forming in the air. Shui Wangshu stopped coughing, but pulled off several strands of his beard. Much of the water in the uncovered water bag spilled out and soaked the front of his robes. I know these sword manuals are difficult for other people, but they are simple for me. Ding Ning looked calmly at him and said softly, "So my plan is to enter Vital Energy Realm before the Min Mountain Sword trials. If it is safer, I will reach at least Vital Energy Realm second-class cultivation. I have never seen a monster like you before." A long time later, Shui Wangshu sighed softly and said slowly, "I suddenly want to see the two most powerful monsters of Min Mountain Sword Sect and Lingshu Sword Gate. I want to see how different they are from you. Originally, I thought the Wildfire Sword Manual was not difficult enough, but you are like this even with these two sword manuals. It seems I do not understand you enough." The shock in Shui Wangshu's eyes subsided, but his brows were slightly furrowed as he asked in a soft voice, "Then these two are enough? Some people in the Min Mountain Sword trials may have stronger sword manuals." Ding Ning shook his head. "There is no strongest sword manual, only stronger people." Chapter 95. So arrogant. Shui Wangshu shouted in a mocking tone, "But so daring." Then he said, emotionally, "I remember that person also said something like this." Ding Ning's gaze flashed. He thought and said, "I want to hear your evaluation of that person. It seems that while you are young, you have heard of that person's story." Shui Wangshu's expression grew serious. He looked at Ding Ning and said seriously, "When His Majesty ascended the throne, people came to ask how to evaluate that person. I replied that I could not evaluate that person because I did not qualify to do so. Also, I will not evaluate that person to anyone because I know His Majesty is wise and powerful. His Majesty can make the Qin dynasty stronger. All the cultivation sects in Chongling need a stronger Qin dynasty to be able to live in the world. Up to today, everything has become a story," Shui Wangshu slowly said. "So I will not evaluate these stories of the past in front of you. Other than the above reasons, I do not want my emotions and thoughts to affect you. You still have a long way to go in Chongling. If you walk with special emotions, this path will be harder." The voices grew louder outside the carriage. Ding Ning lifted the curtain of the carriage and looked out. He saw more and more pedestrians on the road. Some were peddlers pushing small carts, and some were obviously people who came to visit relatives and friends in the temple fair. They all changed into new clothes, and some were obviously devout believers, carrying many offerings to the gods and Buddhas. I remember reading in a book that cultivation is divided into several major realms. At the beginning, it is seeing mountains and water, then the world seeing oneself, and then seeing all living beings. Ding Ning looked at the people coming and going and said softly, "To cultivate to a high level, one must be able to see others, but not be influenced by others. Do you feel this saying is reasonable?" Shui Wangshu stilled. His brow furrowed deeply. After thinking for a dozen breaths, he asked solemnly, "What book did you read?" Ding Ning shook his head. "I forgot. It seems to be a storybook. It seems reasonable." Shui Wangshu's brow was still deeply furrowed. After a moment of thought, he sighed softly. "Pity that even if I heard this saying years ago, I would not have had any special feelings before I entered Realm 7. Now, I do not seem to have enough time to study and verify if it is true. Following the official road and passing through a natural valley, the carriage passed through the plains in front of them. There were fewer farmlands, but more and more courtyards. Travel document. As a low shout came from the card, they officially entered the borders of Jushan district. People of Changling, the numerous soldiers who were inspecting clearly stilled when they saw Ding Ning and Shui Wangshu's travel documents. Shui Wangshu waved his hand tiredly and said softly, "I like peace and quiet. This one understands." Feng Futang bowed and left without another word. "So fake," Ding Ning said softly as he watched Feng Futang's back disappear. He had listened to the entire conversation. Shui Wangshu glared at him. "You say, I am still the steward." Ding Ning chuckled. "About the same." Shui Wangshu grew serious and said worriedly with a frown, "The Feng family is acting like this because they have heard that I have reached Realm 7. Do you think Feng Qianzhua will be afraid and refine the Dingyan bead overnight?" "I think not." Ding Ning glanced at him and said calmly, "If so, he would not need to send a steward like this to use the Empress name to suppress you. If a person feels that using the Empress name is enough to frighten you, he is not afraid, but just threatening." Shui Wangshu's worries disappeared, and he smiled coldly. "You are right. This steward is not humble. He is clearly threatening." Feng Futang entered the carriage with the insignia of the Feng family. Under the fervent and respectful gazes of many passers-by, he headed towards some secluded courtyards in the distance. Those courtyards were large and had gray walls and black tiles, clearly in the style of Changling's architecture. They were very different from the mud walls and bamboo buildings of Jushan district. When the carriage stopped in front of the vermilion gates of a courtyard, Feng Futang got off the carriage. The originally humble steward's figure was abnormally tall and straight at this moment. His entire body flowed with a blade-like coldness, and his originally generous face had also become abnormally cold. Two servants opened the vermilion gates. On the stone path behind the gates, a youth dressed in embroidered robes who looked about the same age as Ding Ning was waiting. This youth had a handsome face, but his hands were behind his back. He looked experienced and dark like a young eagle, ready to pounce at any moment. "How is it?" he asked with natural arrogance and disdain as he looked at Feng Futang. Feng Futang bowed slightly and said, "Shui Wangshu says he is just passing by, but I cannot see the truth. I have to be wary. If he is just passing by, the Feng family can treat him with courtesy. Maybe we can give him some convenience due to his cultivation." The proud and dark youth sneered. "But if he wants to make trouble for my grandfather tomorrow, I will make him pay a greater price." After a pause, he looked at Feng Futang, who seemed to agree. The youth asked, "Didn't Shui Wangshu bring a youth called Ding Ning? What do you think?" "We only learned of Shui Wangshu's arrival today. As for this youth's identity, we will not be able to get accurate information from Changling in a day or two. We can only confirm that he is a cultivator and has not reached vital energy realm." From Shui Wangshu's expression when he looks at him, he should be an outstanding student he has placed his hopes on. He is likely to be his last disciple. The youth smiled, so much his eyes narrowed. If that is the case, then Shui Wangshu better not have any special thoughts tomorrow. Otherwise, I will cripple his proud disciple first. His face was handsome and childish, but the more so, the colder his words sounded when they came out of his mouth. He was Feng Qinghan, Feng Qianzhua's only grandson. Feng Qianzhua had 3 sons, but none of them lived up to expectations. They had a pile of granddaughters. Only the youngest, Feng Qingling, had a son like this. But Feng Qinghan had lived up to expectations. Half a year ago, he had officially entered Vital Energy Realm and was in the 3rd class of Vital Energy Realm. Based on his age, even in Changling, he was outstanding. According to the rules, after the tribute team set off, a group of men from the kitchen god temple would carry out the kitchen god enshrined in the temple and parade it through the streets. Following the established route, they would be sent back to the Fire Virtue Hall of the kitchen god temple to receive the offerings. Then, the various clans of Jushan district and the high officials and nobles would take turns to offer incense. At this time, in front of the Fire Virtue Hall, the incense table was ready and dozens of mahogany chairs were placed on both sides. In an empty space not far from the incense table stood a handsome youth in splendid attire. It was the only grandson of Old Master Feng Qinghan. Feng Futong walked quickly towards him and said softly, "Shui Wangshu and that youth called Ding Ning do not seem to plan on leaving the inn. They said they would leave today, but they are not leaving the inn now. It seems they really do have ideas." Feng Qinghan sneered disdainfully. "If they really do have ideas, then they are asking for trouble." At the same time, multiple carriages were waiting in a quiet manner. In an elegant little building in the garden, two maids were serving a man who looked to be at most in his 50s to groom and wash up. One attendant put a towel soaked in ointment on the man's face and gently rubbed it. The other attendant was using an agarwood comb to gently comb his black hair. This man was unusually patient as he waited for the heat from the towel to seep into his skin. When the towel cooled and the attendant changed it to a clean towel to help him clean his face and fix his sideburns, he asked the middle-aged man who had been bowing at the door. "Shui Wangshu said he was leaving but hasn't left yet." The middle-aged man waiting at the door did not show any dissatisfaction and answered clearly and quickly, "He does not appear to be leaving. He really wants to wait for me. Shui Wangshu can disregard his life, but I, Feng Qianjua, have a great family and business. Why should I lower myself to stand at the same place as him?" When I appeared, I told him not to appear. This man, enjoying the clothing of the two attendants, was naturally the master of the Feng family, the most beloved of Jushan district, Feng Qianjua. After saying this, he looked at the middle-aged man and said, "But to prevent accidents, have eighth mistress come as well. But do not arrange a seat for her, just wait with you." The dance troupe was almost at the Zheng's kitchen god temple. "Follow me." Seeing that it was about time, Shui Wangshu brushed off the peanut shells that had fallen off his body. He looked at Ding Ning, who had no interest in the third plate of salted peanuts, and then stood up. Most of the people had moved with the dance troupe, so the streets around the inn were deserted. Yet Shui Wangshu was at the front. He didn't say anything else and walked straight ahead. The dark-skinned man with the short sword and the other Zheng people thought back to Ding Ning's words. Cold sweat seeped out of their skin and quickly soaked their undergarments in this cold weather. "No wonder Wang Taishu is so impressed by you." Shui Wangshu turned to look at Ding Ning and said softly with a smile, "You don't just have the ability to see through the clouds. It seems that you are also skilled in using clever words and using righteousness to suppress people." Ding Ning smiled coldly and said disdainfully, "Playing politics and using principles that can decide life and death to scare people. How can the people of this wild place compare to the people of Changling?" Shui Wangshu laughed and said, "I just do not know what other tricks the Feng family has. Deal with them as they come." Ding Ning glanced at him. "I heard that the best debaters do not give the other a chance to ask questions and speak." Shui Wangshu thought about it and said, "That makes sense." The moment he spoke, a gentle wave of primal energies of the universe came out of his body. His and Ding Ning's steps did not seem any different than usual, but in the next moment, their figures were unimaginably fast. The passers-by only felt wind blow past the eaves. In the blink of an eye, they saw two faint figures disappear like clouds and cranes. Chapter 97. In front of the Fire Virtue Hall, the important people of Jushan District had arrived one after another. They sat on the two sides of the tables prepared for incense and offerings, but the front row of the two sides was still empty. Just like in the past, these seats were reserved for the old master of the Feng family and his children. In the view of most people of Jushan District could only continue to prosper if the Feng family prospered. Feng Qinghan was still young. While he was famous in Jushan District, he did not need to meddle in these matters. So after greeting the important people who had arrived, he just stood silently to the side and waited. The path was unusually crowded. The crowd was like a tide. They would only part when the procession carrying the kitchen god or dancing gods passed by, and then close again. It would take a long time for the people in the distance to squeeze to the front of the Fire Virtue Hall. Yet Feng Qinghan's eyes suddenly narrowed slightly. A faint murderous intent rose on his young face. He saw a white cloud energy fly over at astounding speed from the distant eaves. In the crowd in front of the Fire Virtue Hall, some people also saw this strange phenomenon, and exclamations continuously sounded out. It was possible to see two figures in the white cloud energy. This was no different from the legendary sword immortals who rode the clouds. Feng Futong took a deep breath. As the most capable steward of the Feng family, he was naturally more cautious than Feng Qinghan. So at this moment, he did not feel anticipation like Feng Qinghan and felt slightly uneasy. Xue Wangshu landed on the scene. Among the important people who had already sat down, there were naturally many cultivators. Yet they could all feel the vast primal energies of the universe in the cloud energy. This presence was like the difference between heaven and earth compared to their cultivation. So everyone's hearts trembled. No one dared to make a sound. The scene was completely silent. This silence spread outwards. Even the crowd around the Fire Virtue Hall quieted down and stopped making noise. Feng Qinghan naturally knew what realm this white-haired and white-bearded old man had reached, yet he did not feel any fear, and an even colder smile appeared at the corners of his mouth. His gaze fell on Ding Ning, who was standing behind Xue Wangshu. Ding Ning stood behind Xue Wangshu, as calm as ever. He sensed Feng Qinghan's malicious gaze. Although he didn't even know Feng Qinghan's identity, he had already vaguely guessed a certain possibility. He didn't even look back at Feng Qinghan. He just unconsciously shook his head. Feng Futong came forward and bowed respectfully to Xue Wangshu, saying, "Xue, why did you change your mind today and come to watch?" Xue Wangshu turned to look at Ding Ning and then at Feng Futong. He smiled faintly and said, "Yesterday he said I was a hypocrite. Today, let's not be so hypocritical." Feng Futong's expression froze slightly. He said softly, "Today there is an offering of the Empress painting. I fear this is not appropriate." Xue Wangshu said calmly, "Of course, it is to liven things up for the people of Jushan District after seeing the Empress painting." Feng Futong took a deep breath and didn't say anything else. He made a gesture of invitation and said, "If this is the case, then Xue, please sit." Xue Wangshu said coolly, "I have sat for a long time. Standing is fine." Feng Futong was silent and respectfully retreated. Since they were no longer hypocritical, no one paid attention to Xue Wangshu and Ding Ning. The people of Jushan District who had already taken their seats saw Xue Wangshu's attitude towards Feng Futong and guessed that Xue Wangshu and Ding Ning had not come to support but to seek revenge. Cold disdain appeared in their eyes. In their opinion, the Feng family would never be afraid of trouble. What they needed to see was how these two outsiders would end up. The kitchen god statue that had made a round sat down first. Then the dance troupe danced even harder around the kitchen god statue. All kinds of offerings were placed on the tribute table. Almost the moment the offerings were placed, the crowd outside cheered. A light carriage walked at the front. The carriage was draped with embroidered curtains and looked unusually luxurious. However, no one was sitting on it. There was only a jade tablet in the middle and a brocade scroll in the middle. A group of people followed closely behind the carriage. They were all members of the Feng family. Among them, Feng Qianzhua, dressed in plain Buddhist robes, was at the front. The people on both sides of the road were extremely respectful to Feng Qianzhua. Some people even knelt down along the street to pay their respects to him. Seeing such a scene, Ding Ning's expression was extremely calm, like a rock in the waves. Shui Wangshu couldn't help but shake his head. It seems that he is very good to the Zhang people of this place. Ding Ning said in a cool tone, like Zhangsun Qianxue. If he is really good, he should have died with his other sect brothers when the army attacked the Bazin Kendo ground. Shui Wangshu looked worriedly at him and said, "It is not good to know too much about the story." Ding Ning said, "Whether it is the story or the present, some truths will not change. This is why I like senior sect brother Zhang Yi and not senior sect brother Su Qin." Shui Wangshu stilled slightly and then said approvingly, "It is reasonable. Even if Zhang Yi is soft-hearted and wishy-washy, he does care for his fellow sect members. Sometimes it is hard to say who is right or wrong, but first we have to talk about integrity." Feng Qianzhua walked to the front of the incense table. In this process, he didn't even look at Shui Wangshu. Amidst the respectful shouts of the surrounding mountain people, he didn't show any arrogance and maintained absolute humility. It was as though the carriage in front of him was not just the painting of the Empress, but the Empress herself. He was the first to light the incense and then started to speak. Unlike previous years, the focus of his words was naturally on the painting of the Empress. He spoke of how generous the Empress was and how she cared for the people of Zhushan district. Today, for the annual Kitchen God Temple Festival, the Empress had personally drawn an auspicious painting to pray for all the people of Zhushan district. Hearing these words, the words "Your Highness" and "Your Highness" kept ringing in his ears. A layer of coldness slowly rose on Ding Ning's calm face with his head bowed. He thought disdainfully inside, but did not say it out loud to avoid Shui Wangshu's worry. If the noblest woman of the Qin dynasty was so generous and cared for the Zhang people, why had she not spoken when the Zhang had been destroyed and countless Zhang people had died in labor and migration? In that time, she had been even colder than many Qin people because she did not want people to associate her with the Zhang people. If this was a hint of repentance and compensation for her past coldness, when she thought of the many other things in the past, when she thought of those excessive coldness, would she feel a hint of repentance? The temple festival quickly entered its climax. Amidst the thunderous cheers of the people of Zhushan district, Feng Qianzhua solemnly bowed to the painting scroll. Then he took out the painting scroll, walked in front of the statue of the kitchen god, and untied the golden threads binding the painting scroll. All the noise quickly disappeared, and the scene quickly quieted. Everyone wanted to see what was in the painting that the Empress had personally drawn. Ding Ning also wanted to know, so he took a deep breath and slowly raised his head. Feng Qianzhua's hands were unusually steady as the painting slowly unfurled in his hands. Sounds of disbelief sounded. Many people of Zhushan district trembled in terror. Some were even about to cry, because the painting that Feng Qianzhua had unfurled was completely blank. It was an unusual kind of white that gave off an indescribable coldness that caused people to think of bitter and cold snow. The Empress had given a painting, yet there was nothing on the painting except a patch of white and bitter coldness. What did this mean? Had Zhushan district done something wrong, and the Empress was using this painting to express some kind of warning? However, at this moment, most people's eyes involuntarily widened. A majestic aura suddenly flowed out from the cold and empty picture scroll. Only cultivators could sense that many paths of primal energies of the universe had suddenly appeared in the world in front of the scroll. Those were seal lines formed by consciousness. Threads of red seeped out of the blank painting. Bright red appeared in the bitter and cold snow. Then everyone saw that this was a red plum blossom in full bloom. The moment this red plum blossom completely appeared on the painting, threads of true red fire energy appeared in the air ahead. They slowly rose and formed red flowers in the air. These flowers caused the air around the Fire Virtue Hall to warm up. The bitter cold is gone. The red plum blossoms. This is the sweetness after bitterness. Someone in the crowd shouted out such words. The terror and bewilderment of the people of Jushan district disappeared. Looking at the flowers formed from true fire energy, their eyes were filled with awe and gratefulness. This kind of scene, this kind of majesty, was a true miracle to them. The Empress cultivation is higher than mine. Sensing the invisible seal lines and the gentle primal energies of the universe in the air, Xue Wangshu said solemnly and respectfully, I fear that she is just one step away from Realm 8. Ding Ning's face was slightly pale, reflected by the bright red flowers. His face looked a bit sickly red. At this time, Feng Qinzhua's gaze finally landed on Xue Wangshu. At this age, what else could he not understand? Did he still want to be angry after seeing a painting like this? He could not understand Xue Wangshu's thoughts and couldn't help but shake his head. Chapter 98. Xue Wangshu saw Feng Qinzhua shake his head. He smiled proudly and thought, some things are not something a cultivator like you, who only wants to enjoy the rest of his life, can understand. Feng Qinzhua's eyebrows slowly rose. He held the painting scroll and turned to walk towards the pavilion at the highest point of the Fire Virtue Hall. The Fire Virtue Hall had been built specifically to worship the Empress painting scroll. The pavilion at the top was taller than all the statues in the temple. The Zheng people of Jushan district did not have any objections to this, because the Empress allowed them to have statues here. There were statues here. Because she allowed them to maintain the etiquette of the Zheng people, they could live like this. The Empress should be taller than all the statues here. That pavilion did not have a staircase to connect to the temple below, but as Feng Qinzhua walked higher and higher, there seemed to be an invisible ladder in the air that steadily supported his body. This scene was like a miracle to the ordinary people of Jushan district. So in their eyes, the Empress was naturally taller than all the statues here, and the old master of the Feng family was at least as tall as all the statues here. Realm 6 First Class, about the same as that old man Di Qingmei, and one door away from Realm 7. Even now, he still does not give up and wants to show off to me. Looking at Feng Qinzhua, who was walking slowly and steadily in the air, Xue Wangshu smiled faintly. He means to say that there is only one door between us, but he comes from the Bazin Kendo ground and has the powerful sword skills and swords of the Bazin Mountain. He may not lose to me, but even now he is still trying to scare me. He probably does not know that my senior sect brother and I split the white goat spirit vein into 3 to reject the owner of the painting scroll in his hand. It is about time. Follow me closely. After smiling faintly, he looked seriously at Ding Ning next to him and warned softly, the situation may be chaotic. I do not want to come so far for you only to be cut by 2 swords. Ding Ning was looking up at Feng Qinzhua. Hearing Xue Wangshu's words, he shook his head and said, it is about time. But later, the one to attack first may be me, and not you. Xue Wangshu stilled. What do you mean? Ding Ning said expressionlessly, while I am not willing, it seems that someone has set their sights on me. Xue Wangshu looked around in shock. He finally understood Ding Ning's meaning and said softly, "It should be vital energy, realm 3rd class. Just like how I have one more door than Feng Qianjua, the other has one more door than you. Do you have confidence?" Ding Ning nodded and said, "He is weaker than Su Qin." All the important people of Zhushan district looked at Xue Wangshu and Ding Ning, who were conversing softly. Their expressions grew more complicated and expectant. "This is not a good deal," Feng Qianjua said coldly, slightly angered at these words. Xue Wangshu looked at him and shook his head seriously. "This is not just about the Dingyan bead. There is also the sword that landed on my senior sect brother. Without your sword, my senior sect brother may have broken through the door that you have not been able to step through." Feng Qianjua's expression grew colder. He said with slight disdain, "Is Realm 7 so easy to enter? Much less a loser." Xue Wangshu looked coolly at him and said, "If we are not on the same page, it is pointless to speak. In the end, the sword will speak. You two are old. If you are injured from using the sword, it will not be good." Also, Xue likely came prepared. "My grandfather has not used the sword for a long time. This is not fair to begin with." At this moment, a childish and cold voice sounded out. "Dueling with swords to gain more combat experience is something that we youths should do." Hearing this voice, Xue Wangshu turned to look at Feng Qinghan, who had a young face but a dark and cold gaze. He sighed softly with a thread of true sympathy. "This is an adult matter. Children should not interfere." Feng Qinghan felt that he had been underestimated. Anger rose. He puffed out his chest and said in a cold voice, "Xue, why are you so aggressive? I see that, Xue, you have also brought a young disciple. What do you think if I challenge him now?" Xue Wangshu thought of his previous conversation with Ding Ning and couldn't help but sigh. He thought Feng Qianjua's greatest mistake was not sending this precious grandson to Chongling to study. If he had come to Chongling and seen many young geniuses much stronger than him, Feng Qinghan would not be so arrogant right now. Thinking of this, he became happy. The more he looked at Ding Ning, the more pleasing he found him. Ding Ning slowly looked up. He did not have much interest in bullying Feng Qinghan. He had too many people to catch up to and too many things to do. He naturally did not care about the feelings of a youth. However, he was afraid of trouble. So he asked directly, "If I win, will you return the Dingyan bead to White Goat Cave?" Feng Qinghan's eyes lit up. He could not suppress his joy. He turned and bowed to Feng Qianjua and said, "Grandfather, please allow it." Feng Qianjua's brows still did not loosen. Just from the previous words and Ding Ning's calm expression, he felt that this Chongling youth following Xue Wangshu was dangerous. But he could sense that this Chongling youth was very thin and weak and had not reached vital energy realm. Even if there was something special, even if Feng Qinghan really lost, this was just a victory between children. This seemed to be the best response right now. In fact, he even praised his beloved grandson from the bottom of his heart. Compared to the mediocrity of his 3 sons, this grandson was extraordinary. "Xue Wangshu, let my eldest grandson fight your disciple. If your disciple wins, I will give the Dingyan bead to you. But I have to make this clear. This Dingyan bead was won from your senior sect brother during a treasure hunt in the ruins of an ancient sect. It is not something that belongs to White Goat Cave." After Feng Qianjua said this, he shouted to the people behind him, "Li Zhu, bring that bead over." As he shouted, a beautiful woman quickly walked in front, took down a bead hanging from her neck, and handed it to Feng Qianjua. This was a snowy white bead the size of a longan. It flashed strangely like it was breathing and gave off light. Looking at this bead, Feng Qinghan laughed so hard his eyes narrowed. He turned around and looked at Ding Ning, who was still standing behind Shui Wangshu. He said mockingly, "Do not hide behind other people. If you win against me, this bead is White Goat Caves." Many of the important people of Jushan district who were sitting on mahogany chairs looked with schadenfreude at Shui Wangshu and Ding Ning. They felt that this time, Shui Wangshu and Ding Ning had been checkmated and could not come down. Yet to everyone's surprise, Ding Ning did not waste words. He calmly took a few steps forward in front of Shui Wangshu. Then he pulled out his sword and said, "Please." Chapter 99. Shui Wangshu couldn't help but shake his head. Everything was developing as Ding Ning had just now said. As expected, he was following behind Ding Ning. Sometimes he could not understand Ding Ning's meticulous observation and judgment, which seemed to be able to see through people's hearts, because this ability, in addition to talent, often came from experience in life. Ding Ning held his sword across his chest. Many whispers reached his ears. They were mocking him for holding a remnant sword. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Feng Qianzhua's expression did not change. His heart grew colder. He had truly lived like a prince for too long. He didn't even recognize this sword anymore. Feng Qinghan's gaze landed on Ding Ning's remnant sword. Even Feng Qianzhua did not recognize the last flower sword that had changed in appearance due to its fracture. He, who had not been born when the Bazin Kendo ground changed, naturally could not recognize this sword. He looked at the uneven fracture and fine cracks on the sword in Ding Ning's hand, and more disdain appeared at the corners of his mouth. With a soft hiss, he pulled out his sword. The sword that appeared in his hand was about 3 feet long and unusually thin. In the center of the white blade, a black seal line stretched from the hilt to the edge. It was like an ink line drawn on a sword-shaped piece of white paper. Ding Ning's brows slowly furrowed. He recognized this sword. This was the painting sword of the Bazin Kendo ground. In the former Bazin Kendo ground, only the most noble people were worthy of possessing this sword. Now, such a sword had appeared in Feng Qinghan's hand. Seeing Ding Ning's frown, Feng Qinghan's eyes grew smug. He thought that Ding Ning felt great pressure because of the sword in his hand. However, his movements did not stop for long. "Please." His mocking voice had just sounded when he turned into an afterimage, cutting across a distance of several meters. There was a loud bang. The swords in his and Ding Ning's hands had already collided. Countless sharp sword edges flew out in all directions, and 2 semicircular arcs of light appeared between the two of them. Between the arcs of light, there were many flower-like stars surging, blooming with their own power. This stalemate only lasted for a short moment. In less than a breath's time, Feng Qinghan's figure paused slightly. The painting sword in his hand was still swinging forward. A layer of sword light constantly surged on the sword like flowing water. However, the light in front of Ding Ning had completely shattered. The sleeve of his right hand that held the sword had already been torn by the sword chi. He retreated in distress. His feet stepped on the stone pavement one after another, and the soles of his shoes gave off cracking sounds. Feng Qianzhua's expression relaxed slightly, and he exhaled softly. This first test proved that while this Chongling youth was skilled in swordsmanship, in terms of power, there was a great disparity between him and Feng Qinghan. The nobility of Jushan district sitting on the mahogany chairs had even greater disdain in their eyes. This was the great difference between energy, refinement realm, and vital energy realm. The ordinary people of Jushan district were still in shock from the collision of the swords. They could not imagine that Feng Qinghan and Ding Ning's small bodies contained such terrifying power, but no matter what, the other had been sent flying by the young master of the Feng family. Clearly, he was not a match. For a moment, cheers and applause rose from all directions. Looking at Ding Ning, who still had not steadied himself, Feng Qinghan had even more disdain on his face. Yet, he did not continue to attack. His eyes narrowed slightly. Vital energy slowly flowed out of his hand and through the ink line on the paper-white sword. He focused and slashed at the air between him and Ding Ning. The white sword shadow slashed through the air. However, a black sword aura stopped in the air, not moving at all. Suddenly, a black line appeared in the cold air. Seeing this black line, many of the nobility of Jushan district started to breathe faster, and their gazes grew cold. This was clearly a seal line. Everyone in Jushan district knew that Feng Qinghan was a talented cultivator, but no one had known that he mainly cultivated the sword's seal path, using sword chi to draw talismans. Every sword chi was a talisman line. In the end, they would form various complete talismans, which would be able to gather even more heaven and earth yuan chi and release even more power. This was a method of dual cultivation of the sword and seal. It was also a very difficult method to master. Even if it was just drawing, it was much more difficult to draw in the empty air than on yellow paper. Also, there could not be any deviation. Otherwise, the seal lines would not be able to resonate with the primal energies of the universe. Feng Qinghan's cultivation was higher than this Chongling youth. Now that he showed such astounding swordsmanship, what chance did this Chongling youth have to win? Feng Qinghan's expression was slightly disdainful, but his gaze was focused. He swung his sword again, and another black seal line appeared in the air in front of him. The two seal lines did not cross, but there was an inexplicable reaction between them. Black smoke appeared. Ding Ning finally stopped retreating. His right sleeve was in tatters, and there were even bloody marks on the back of his hand. But to everyone's puzzlement, he still had no fear on his face, and was still calm. Looking at the two seal lines that started to give off black smoke in the air, the broken sword in his right hand steadily swung forward. The inky green sword seemed to move like the sword move he had made in front of Shui Wangshu in the carriage. Chapter 100. Ding Ning, who dared to assassinate Song Shinshu alone right after entering energy refinement realm, naturally had extraordinary combat experience. But when Feng Qinghan's gaze became slightly strange, and before the purple gold seal appeared in Feng Qinghan's hand, he sensed danger. Without the slightest pause, his body once again leaped backwards. The remnant sword in his hand drew seal lines in front of him again, but compared to before, he drew seal lines at an astounding speed. His physical energy flowed out even faster. The rapid flow of physical energy even cracked his fingernails and caused them to bleed. Two sword seals formed at the same time in front of him. There was a loud explosion. Unlike the previous sword talismans, when the two sword talismans exploded, they did not condense icy cold yuan qi. Instead, they exploded into two balls of dense green yuan qi. There seemed to be two green mountains rising and closing in front of him. All of the Jushan district cultivators watching the battle had grave expressions. No matter what kind of sword seal manual it was, there could not be only one sword move, or only one kind of seal. But the more sword seals one could draw, the further one could go on the sword seal path. Previously, Feng Qinghan's skill in sword seal path, compared to Ding Ning's display of turning two sword seals into green mountains, was like the difference between a toddler learning to walk and an adult who could run. Feng Qinghan knew that he had greatly underestimated the strength of this Chongling youth behind Shui Wangshu, but he did not care at this time. Following his shout, an extremely powerful talisman intent suddenly burst forth from his left hand, enveloping an area of more than 30 meters around him. All of the air in this area froze and vibrated strangely. Even the heavy kitchen god statue behind him began to tremble, as if in fear of this power. Shui Wangshu's eyes narrowed slightly, his brows cold, as though there was a layer of transparent ice flashing. The purple gold seal flew out of Feng Qinghan's hand. The golden seal lines on the purple seal seemed to be some kind of strange being that flew out of the seal and quickly spread towards the space in front of them. In the next moment, amidst the shocked exclamations of countless people, every tiny golden talisman line grew in size and turned into true golden lightning. Amidst the rising purple energy, the arm-thick golden lightning twisted together. The terrifying presence at the front was like an enormous python with its mouth wide open. Along the way, crackling sounds could be heard as countless charred marks were instantly left on the stone path by the dispersing lightning. The two green mountains could not stop this wild seal essence. When they touched the lightning at the front, they were about to collapse. Ding Ning appeared somewhat lonely as he stood in the middle of the lightning storm, in front of the chaotic primal energies of the universe. Facing the lightning that was many times larger than his body, his expression was complicated. There was sadness, anger, but no fear could be seen. His sword steadily and quickly cut through the air in front of him. The moment the lightning and the two green mountains touched, he turned into a square sword seal. The white sword talisman spread forward, and between the two green mountains, a flowing river instantly appeared. A muffled sound reverberated. Multiple seal essences finally connected and fiercely collided. The two green mountains collapsed. The rushing river flowed backwards, but the lightning python was still moving forward. Dazzling bolts of lightning passed through the mist and water. They reflected more light and had the presence of a serpent turning into a serpent. Feng Qinghan's eyes showed even more pleasure. His body flew up and followed closely behind. The shattered green primordial qi, the surging water vapor, and the water that had been heated by the thunder fire all rushed backwards. All kinds of presences were squeezed together by an invisible hand and charged towards Ding Ning's body. Ding Ning's body was sent flying backwards. His outer robes were torn by all kinds of powers and gave off tearing sounds. But his sword-wielding right hand was still extremely steady. In this moment, he turned into a sword seal again. Many of the important people of Zhushan district changed expressions. Ding Ning's performance caused his sword seal to carry an unyielding presence of sailing against the current. A patch of gray primal energies of the universe landed on the flowing river. It was like a lone sail in the sky going against the current. The dazzling lightning and wild seal essences continued to move forward. The enormous waves threw up this lone sail and tore it apart. Ding Ning's expression was still absolutely calm. Sensing the direction of those lightning bolts, his eyes suddenly lit up as bright as the stars. His physical energy furiously flooded into the last flower remnant sword in his hand, into every tiny seal script, and into every tiny crack. He did not draw any more seals. Instead, as countless small white flowers bloomed on the sword, he threw the last flower sword forward. The sword suddenly spread apart. Countless sword threads stretched out like they had when they had pierced Su Qin's left hand. In this moment, looking at these flowers filled with an aura of doom, and feeling Ding Ning's final throw, Feng Qianzhua finally thought of something. His face suddenly turned snow white, and great fear surged in his body. The remnant sword with the flowers pierced the enormous waves. This was a sword without any support. Yet this sword was not meant to block, but to guide. Good. Sensing the exquisiteness of this sword essence, even the slightly nervous Shui Wangshu could not help but pat his thigh and cheer loudly. The important people of Zhushan district on the red wooden chairs all exclaimed in disbelief. Many of them could not help but stand up. The spreading sword threads and the bolts of lightning touched. Almost all of the lightning flowed along the sword threads into the sword hilt, and then surged out of the sword hilt to form an even brighter wave. Yet the direction of the lightning completely changed. This bright streak of lightning rushed out of the water and into the sky at a slanted angle. There was a loud rumble as this lightning exploded in the air. The surging waves hit Ding Ning's body. Ding Ning's body retreated, a thread of blood coming out of his mouth. Enough. However, he looked at Feng Qinghan, who was moving along with the flow of the water, and shouted angrily. Feng Qinghan heard his shout, but at this time he did not hear the strong warning and threat in Ding Ning's shout. He only saw the last flower sword flashing with lightning as it fell. He only saw that Ding Ning was wounded and had no sword in his hand. So he did not pause at all and unhesitatingly stabbed at Ding Ning. Black sword energy once again appeared in front of the painting sword. Ding Ning's expression became absolutely calm again. He had no other choice. Even if it was him, he would have to use all of his power to break Feng Qinghan's sword. Since he had no choice, he did not consider the consequences or anything else. He reached out with his right hand, and his fingers formed a sword. His right hand's fingernails had all cracked and bled. At this time, his physical energy surged out without reservation. The blood followed the physical energy, and a blood sword seemed to appear in his hand. Physical energy and blood did not have much power, and could not match the sharp and tough painting sword. But at this time, Feng Qianzhua, who had not completely woken up from his memories, was startled awake. He opened his mouth, but did not have time to shout. Many seal lines appeared in front of Ding Ning again. Many blood-red seal lines. Feng Qinghan, whose young face had been filled with cruelty, suddenly stopped breathing, and his body quickly stiffened. He did not have the time to react. The blood-red seal lines started to burn in front of him. Large amounts of burning primal energies of the universe contracted rapidly. It was as if a setting sun had appeared on the surface of the river with a lone sail and a distant shadow. There was a loud boom. The setting sun and his sword tip collided and immediately shattered into countless blood-red lines of fire. Ah! The moment the blood-red lines of fire pierced his skin, this young master of the Feng family, who had wanted to cripple Ding Ning from the start, felt terror and gave a shrill scream. Pew, 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 pew. The sound of air being penetrated came out of his body. Countless thin lines of fire immediately penetrated his body, carrying small streams of blood as they passed through his body and sprayed onto the stone path behind him. Grandfather, before his body hit the ground, Feng Qinghan felt as though everything in his body had been penetrated. His organs, his marrow, his energy sea, his jade palace. In this moment, he was like a true child. He turned helplessly to look at Feng Qianzhua. After a shrill cry, he fainted completely. Qinghan. Before most people could react, Feng Qianzhua gave an indescribable scream. He dashed out like a mad tiger and caught Feng Qinghan, who had completely fainted. What sword art is this? Using vital energy and blood as a line, he uses a sword. Even if he can be saved, I fear he won't be able to get out of bed after such an attack. The young master of the Feng family was. At this time, all the spectators in Jushan district finally realized what had happened. The shock that followed made most of the people feel cold and numb. Feng Qianzhua's face, which was usually gentle and kind like a Buddha, was now extremely distorted. Yet, to everyone's surprise, Ding Ning calmly took a few steps forward and picked up his last flower remnant sword that had fallen to the ground. With a boom, it was like a clap of thunder. A spinning wall of wind suddenly appeared around Feng Qianzhua. His hair danced like snakes, and endless murderousness spread. Shui, Wangshu frowned slightly. He took a step forward and came in front of Ding Ning, who had picked up the sword. Then he looked coolly at the crazed Feng Qianzhua and said, "You should know he asked for it." "Asked for it? Ha ha ha." Feng Qianzhua suddenly threw his head back and laughed wildly. "Take my sword." In the next moment, he gave an earth-shaking roar. Chapter 101. Everyone could understand Feng Qianzhua's feelings right now. Yet at this time, a calm voice sounded behind Shui Wangshu. "Where is the Dingyan bead?" Everyone's gaze, once again, gathered on Ding Ning. Everyone knew that it was him who had said this, and what he meant. Previously, Feng Qianzhua had promised that if he could defeat Feng Qianzhua, the Dingyan bead would belong to White Goat Cave. Based on this agreement, Feng Qianzhua had to hand over the Dingyan bead. Yet, in this situation, it was inappropriate to ask for the Dingyan bead so calmly. "Dingyan bead?" Feng Qianzhua laughed in anger. He looked at Feng Qinghan in his hand and said, "Is my grandson's cultivation and life less than a Dingyan bead?" Ding Ning looked calmly at him and said, "Dingyan bead." All the nobility of Zhushan district present were speechless. Ding Ning only said these 3 words, and from his expression, this was a matter of course. Feng Qianzhua was right to give the Dingyan bead, and Feng Qinghan's cultivation and life were less than the Dingyan bead. Feng Qianzhua's eyes were so angry they seemed to burn. "Dingyan bead." Ding Ning looked fearlessly at him and repeated calmly. This was like a child stubbornly asking for candy, but Feng Qianzhua felt great disdain and coldness. He handed the bloodied Feng Qinghan to his crying family members who had gathered around him and spread his left hand. The snowy white Dingyan bead flew out of his hand and slowly landed towards Ding Ning. It did not carry any great power, but his expression turned completely cold. "Even if I give it to you, can you use it?" His murderous gaze swept across Ding Ning and Shui Wangshu's bodies as he said in a cold voice. Ding Ning caught the snowy white Dingyan bead. Then he did something that no one had expected. He took out his water sack, rinsed the Dingyan bead, and then calmly swallowed the Dingyan bead. All the nobility of Zhushan district present sank into silence and shock. Ding Ning didn't even say a word this time, but his actions were like a slap to Feng Qianzhua's face. He used his actions to tell Feng Qianzhua that even if he and Shui Wangshu died here, he would use the Dingyan bead. Even more shocking was that after swallowing the Dingyan bead, Ding Ning closed his eyes and sat down on a rock behind Shui Wangshu. He did not seem to want to care about what was happening around him and started to refine the Dingyan bead. Seeing Ding Ning act like this and hearing the cries behind him, Feng Qianzhua knew he had to be calm, but his hands still uncontrollably trembled. He took a deep breath and reached out his hand. The steward of the Feng family, Feng Futang, who had been praised by Shui Wangshu as a talker, was standing behind him with a pale face and a long sword in a black scabbard. Seeing Feng Qianzhua's hand reach towards him, his hands uncontrollably trembled. Seeing this, Shui Wangshu waited calmly. Feng Qianzhua did not take the sword from the steward. His hand landed on the hilt of the black scabbard sword and started to pull it out. This was a clear indication of his attitude. The hilt of the black scabbard sword was black gold. However, when the long sword was slowly pulled out, it was as if a rainbow was blooming in the field. Many people's bodies were covered in rainbow-colored light. The blade of this long sword was actually made of colored glass, and it was actually 7-colored. Shui Wangshu's furrowed brow suddenly relaxed, as though he had finally found the answer to a question he had been perplexing for a long time. He softly murmured to himself, "So it is this sword." The Bazin Kendo ground had once been the strongest place to cultivate the sword in the Qin dynasty. Naturally, it had countless powerful sword manuals and famed swords. The group of people who had survived the Bazin Kendo ground had received many sword manuals and famed swords. In the past, when Feng Qianzhua defeated Du Qingjiao and took the Dingyan bead, he had used his life-bond sword, and not the famed swords of the Bazenkendo ground. Now, the question of what kind of sword Feng Qianzhua had chosen from the swords of the Bazan Mountains was finally answered. Of all the famed swords of the Bazenkendo ground, only one was this rainbow. This sword was called the Seven Treasure Glass Sword, also known as the Buddha Light Demon Subduing Sword. Following the appearance of this sword, a huge aura spread out continuously. All the people who were closer to them felt the danger and unconsciously retreated. Even the statue of the kitchen god was moved away. Only Feng Qianzhua, Xue Wangshu, and Ding Ning were left in the open space in front of the Fire Virtue Hall. The rainbow light grew brighter and brighter, and finally turned into rings of Buddha light in Feng Qianzhua's hand. Inexplicable primal energies of the universe gathered in these rings of Buddha light. They surrounded Feng Qianzhua's body and gradually formed an enormous Buddha shrine. In contrast, Feng Qianzhua's body seemed to grow and become a venerable with rainbow light. Within the rings of Buddha light, Feng Qianzhua was dazed for a moment. He felt this was absurd. After so many years, that sword that should not have existed in the world had reappeared in front of him because of the revenge of a little white goat cave. After so many years, he still had to use this sword to fight to the death. Yet this was only a brief moment. The stray thoughts in his mind were washed away by the Buddha light and turned into pure murderousness. His wrist flipped, and the sword giving off astounding Buddha light stabbed towards Xue Wangshu. As he stabbed, the rings of Buddha light appeared. Circles of Buddhist light overlapped and alternated. It was as if turbid waves had suddenly appeared between the heavens and the earth. A wild wind rose from the ground. Many of the ordinary citizens of Zhushan district in front of him were unable to stand and were blown backwards. Xue Wangshu's snow-white hair was blown straight back by the wild wind. Yet, facing such wild winds and the surging turbid waves, he shook his head and sighed emotionally. In the end, my spirit is not enough. Using the turbid wave sword manual with the Seven Treasures glass sword, the power is more than enough, but it lacks some charm. If my spirit is enough, I would have changed to some Zen sword manuals to cultivate again. Without destruction, there can be no construction. Why not give up my attainments in the turbid wave sword? As he sighed, he reached out towards the turbid waves in front of him. Originally, he had been using the sect master sword of White Goat Cave. At this time, he had given the sect master sword to Li Daoji. He did not have any other swords on him, so he could only use his life bond sword. What kind of sword was Xue Wangshu's life bond sword? Ding Ning was also very curious. So he, who had been working hard to refine the Dingyan bead, opened his eyes. An unusually calm presence came from Xue Wangshu's palm. There was no dazzling light, only the most simple color, like the most ordinary stone on the road. The life bond sword that appeared in Xue Wangshu's hand was like a small sword made from the most ordinary stone. Yet all the cultivators of Zhushan district felt an unusually dangerous presence. At this moment, layers of stone skin peeled off from the small sword's body. Every tiny piece of rock flew forward like a huge rock, slapping towards the monstrous turbid waves. The sword body that was exposed from the inside was radiating an unimaginable light. The light was so dazzling that no one could see its color clearly. It even made people feel that the sword inside had no substance and was completely formed by the dazzling light. Yet everyone knew that this sword did exist, so everyone started to react. This sword had been hidden for too long. It was like a peerless sword buried in the earth. The dust around the sword had formed stone. Yet today, this peerless sword finally showed its edge again. The Buddhist light appeared dim in front of the light of this sword. Feng Qianzhua also felt the suffocating pressure. He gave a low growl, and the sword in his hand slashed 72 times into the air in front of him. 72 waves suddenly appeared in the Buddhist light and immediately shattered all the stone that flew over. At this time, all the stone on Xue Wangshu's life-bond sword fell off. Under the blinding and white light, his entire body seemed to be carved from white jade. He did not make any extra movements. He simply stabbed forward like the streets of Chongling. There was a loud boom. The sound came from the distant world. Above his head, an invisible mountain suddenly appeared. It rapidly shrank and surged into the intrinsic sword in his hand. At the same time, almost all of his vital energy and the primal energies of the universe accumulated in his body surged out of his body and into his life-bond sword. He could only use such a powerful sword move once at most. But this was what he wanted. He did not want to be entangled and just wanted to decide victory with one blow. He only poured out all of his sword intent and power into this sword. The Buddhist light was extinguished. The turbid waves collapsed. Feng Qianzhua was filled with disbelief as he watched the resplendent sword light stab towards him. He could not imagine that Xue Wangshu could make such a powerful blow. He was unwilling to be defeated by this sword just like that. An endless fire was burning in his eyes as he let out a shrill cry. The circle of Buddhist light emanating from the 7 treasures' glazed sword in his hand suddenly changed, turning into countless colorful sword beams that bloomed in front of him. In a flash, it seemed like thousands of swords were stabbing towards Xue Wangshu. It was impossible to see which sword was the true 7 treasures' glass sword. Yet Xue Wangshu just smiled, faintly. His sword move did not change at all, and continued to advance in a straight line. All of the 7 colored sword lights immediately disappeared. Feng Qianzhua's howl turned into a wail as he retreated. Blood sprayed out of his abdomen. His body bounced off the stone path, leaving behind a long trail of blood. He did not stop until he hit the steps in front of the Fire Virtue Hall. Many small bamboo branches that had been half-burned stabbed into his flesh and were pushed out by the blood and energy flowing out of his body. The man in brocade robes stood in disbelief. His sword futilely reached forward, but it was still several feet away from Xue Wangshu's body. In the next moment, he dazedly lowered his head and looked at the long handle of the broom pressed against his chest. Then he lost all his strength and collapsed to the ground. Several more people roared and rushed forward. Xue Wangshu stood where he was and stabbed several more times. Blood gushed out of these people's chests as they screamed and fell to the ground. The broom handle was still a broom handle, just an ordinary long bamboo pole. However, because the small bamboo branches at the front had already scattered, the very front died in a layer of blood. Under the friction between flesh and bone, it already gained a bit of sharpness. So right now, in Xue Wangshu's hands, this ordinary long bamboo pole was like an exceptionally long bamboo sword. The surroundings quickly quieted, seeing the cultivators fall into pools of blood after Xue Wangshu's simple stab. Many of the important people of Jushan district who had been prepared to attack sat back down with pale faces. In the few stabs just now, Xue Wangshu had not used any vital energy. He was just using this method to tell everyone that even if he did not use vital energy, there was still a great disparity in the understanding and power of the sword between Realm 7 cultivators and ordinary cultivators and martial artists. In order to kill a cultivator above Realm 7, one had to use a large army or many Realm 5 and 6 cultivators to fight. In the present Jushan district, if they forced Xue Wangshu to stay, how many people would die? I may die. Everyone will die. Xue Wangshu casually lowered the long bamboo pole dripping with blood. He looked coolly at Feng Qianzhua, who was surrounded by people, and said, "But I can guarantee that I will kill you before I die." Because of pain and anger, Feng Qianzhua's entire body trembled. Yet he started to realize that Xue Wangshu spoke the truth. Just now, he understood that his understanding of the sword was nothing compared to Xue Wangshu. If he did not have the famed sword of the Bazin Kendo ground, he would have lost even more miserably. You go too far. He did not know how to respond, so he shouted in anger. Xue Wangshu smiled faintly. From the start, he had said to Feng Qianzhua that it was useless to speak when they did not agree. In the end, the sword had to speak. If he had not felt good when he had pierced through the roiling waves, he would not have said a word after defeating Feng Qianzhua. So he did not want to say anything at this time. He turned and motioned for Ding Ning to follow him. Ding Ning turned and followed closely behind him. But at the same time, he said calmly, "How did we go too far?" "From the start, we just wanted to return to Dingyan Bead. You set the rules. When you were shouting and cursing, we did not even say a word. In the Qin dynasty, there are countless fair duels with predetermined conditions. But there are few places like Jushan District where you do not admit defeat after losing and want to kill us all here in the Qin dynasty. Do you not feel ashamed? And your Feng family?" After a slight pause, Ding Ning did not turn around. He followed Xue Wangshu through the parting crowd and said calmly, "Originally, a matter that could have been resolved in a fair duel in front of the temple fair. But you used the Empress painting to threaten. In the end, you lost and wanted to incite all of Jushan District to try and kill a Realm 7 cultivator. Even if the Feng family does not admit this, if this matter spreads, what do you think the officials of Chongling will think? Will they feel that the Feng family did well?" Hearing Ding Ning's calm and cold words, and thinking carefully about the words, Feng Qianzhua's body grew colder and more terrified. In the end, his clothes were soaked in cold sweat. Watching Ding Ning and Xue Wangshu disappear from his sight, he gave a desperate bestial howl. The crowd parted in front of Xue Wangshu like the ocean opening a path. "How do you feel?" Ding Ning, who was following Xue Wangshu like a shadow, looked at the Jushan district people with complicated expressions and asked Xue Wangshu softly. Xue Wangshu turned to look at him and laughed like a child. He said, "I feel very good." Then he asked Ding Ning in response, "How do you feel?" Ding Ning answered seriously, "I also feel very good." Xue Wangshu said, "I do not mean that. I am asking you how you feel after swallowing the Dingyan bead." Feeling the pure medicinal power of the Dingyan bead slowly released in his body, Ding Ning's expression grew serious. Other than the legendary Yu Emperor who had left behind this method, no one knew the secrets of the Nine-Death Silkworm. Even for him who had cultivated the Nine-Death Silkworm, some of the characteristics of this method could only be detected by him as his cultivation progressed. The moment he swallowed the Dingyan bead, he found that he had overlooked a fact. It was not just the pills that directly affected physical energy and vital energy that could help him cultivate faster. This kind of pill that nourished the body and organs could also help him cultivate faster. Because the Nine-Death Silkworm's greatest weakness was that it used up too much of its energies. The Nine-Death Silkworm used up its energies quickly, but it had to control its cultivation speed in order to not let its organs fail too quickly. Pills that nourished the organs and nourished the body could allow the body to consume more energies to cultivate when the organs failed at the same rate. Simply speaking, the Nine-Death Silkworm could cultivate faster, but his organs were not strong enough and could not withstand a faster speed. So he did not need spirit medicines that directly affected physical energy and vital energy. As long as it was a nourishing pill that could strengthen the organs, he could cultivate faster in the future. Not only did the medicinal power of this beauty-nourishing pearl make him feel as if he had been injected with a lot of new life, but to him, it also gave him some epiphanies and reminders during his cultivation. "I feel very good." So he looked seriously at Xue Wangshu and said, At least I can win a few years of time. Shui Wangshu did not know what Ding Ning was truly thinking, but he could feel Ding Ning's sincere gratitude. This made him even more satisfied. He stroked his little white beard and said with a satisfied smile, "That's good." Looking at the satisfied smile on Shui Wangshu's face, Ding Ning's heart filled with grievances and killing intent was filled with a kind of warmth. He thought of Zhang Sun, Qian Xue, the old woman in the fish market. He thought that other than those two, he had never spent so much time with a person in Chongling. Thinking that this white-haired old man did not have much time left, his heart softened. He suggested softly, "Since this is the case, do you want to go drink? Do you want me to find a girl to accompany you?" Shui Wangshu suddenly turned his head and looked in disbelief at him. He pulled off several more strands of his beard. "Are you joking?" You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.